Desmond Doss. They claimed the battlefield belonged to machine guns. He proved Mercy could win. The rope sagged over the cliff edge like a frayed promise. Someone had anchored it to a splintered tree stump at the top of Hacksaw Ridge, looping it through a rusted carabiner salvaged from an engineering kit. Below, in the rain-soaked staging area where the 77th Infantry Division had spent the morning regrouping, stretcher-bearers stared up at the ridge and whispered about what waited on top. The rope swayed in the wind, barely visible through the smoke drifting down from the plateau above. Desmond Doss crouched beside his aid bag, checking bandages and morphine syrettes for the third time that hour. His hands moved automatically, touching each item as though the ritual could steady his breathing. Around him, riflemen cleaned weapons and tried not to look at the cliff. The western slope of Okinawa had turned into a killing field. 3 assaults in 4 hours, 3 retreats. Bodies still lay scattered across the plateau above, tangled in the mud where Japanese machine guns had cut them down. Lieutenant Gorman stood nearby, radio handset pressed to his ear, rain dripping from his helmet. His face was grey. He'd lost half his platoon trying to flank the machine gun nests. Now Division wanted another push before nightfall. Gorman glanced at the cliff edge, then at the rope, then at Doss. "You don't have to go up there," the lieutenant said quietly. "Medics aren't required on the first wave." Doss looked up from his bag. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "If they get hit, they'll need me, sir." Gorman didn't answer. He turned away, shoulders tight. The first gunfire erupted just after 1400 hours. Doss heard it through the haze, a distant chattering that made his stomach clench. Then the shout started. Wounded voices calling from the top of the ridge. The sound carried down the cliff face like an accusation. A sergeant appeared at Gorman's side, breathless. "Sir, we've got men pinned up there. Can't get them off the plateau. Machine guns have every approach zeroed." Gorman closed his eyes. "Tell them to hold. We'll send another squad too." "Sir, they're calling for a medic." Every eye turned toward Doss. He stood slowly, slinging his aid bag over his shoulder. His legs felt weak. The rope swayed above him, fraying at the edge where it scraped against coral rock. He thought about the Bible tucked in his shirt pocket. He thought about the promise he'd made never to carry a weapon. He thought about the voices calling from the darkness above. "I'll go," he said. Gorman grabbed his arm. "Doss, listen to me. That ridge belongs to their guns. You won't make it 10 yards. Doss looked at the lieutenant's hand, then at his face. "Maybe not, sir, but I gotta try." He walked toward the base of the cliff. Behind him, soldiers watched in silence. Someone muttered a prayer. Doss reached the rope and tested its tension. The fibers were damp and rough against his palms. He began to climb. The ridge opened above him like a mouth full of broken teeth. Smoke drifted through shattered bamboo groves. The ground was cratered, muddy, littered with spent casings and abandoned gear. And somewhere in that chaos, men were screaming for help. Doss pulled himself over the lip of the cliff and rolled into cover behind a fallen tree. His heart hammered. He whispered the prayer he'd repeated 100 times in training. "Lord, help me get one more, just one more." Then he crawled toward the screaming. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. The plateau at the top of Hacksaw Ridge stretched before Doss like a vision from a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Rain had turned the ground into slick mud. Shell craters overlapped, creating a maze of shallow depressions filled with brown water. 50 yards ahead, a machine gun chattered, Japanese Type 92. He'd learned to recognize the sound. The bullets snapped overhead, kicking up dirt along the ridgeline. He found the first wounded man in a crater near a twisted bamboo stump, a private from 2nd Platoon, maybe 19 years old. Both hands pressed against his thigh where shrapnel had opened the muscle. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Medic," the boy gasped. "Oh God, medic." "I'm here," Doss whispered, sliding into the crater. His hands shook as he tore open a field dressing. "Stay still. You're gonna be fine." The machine gun fired again, closer this time. Doss worked fast. Tourniquet, pressure bandage, morphine syringe into the shoulder. The private's breathing slowed. Doss glanced toward the cliff edge. The rope was barely visible through the smoke, 100 yards back across open ground. "Can you walk?" The private shook his head. Doss looked around. No stretcher, no help, just mud and smoke and the distant hammer of Japanese guns. He grabbed the private under the arms and began dragging him backward, moving from crater to crater, using every depression for cover. It took 20 minutes to reach the cliff edge. By the time they arrived, Doss's uniform was soaked with rain and sweat. His shoulders burned. The private was semi-conscious, muttering about his mother. At the rope, Doss found 2 other soldiers, a corporal and a rifleman who'd been helping wounded off the plateau. "Jesus, Doss," the corporal said. "How many more are up there?" Doss looked back across the ridge. He could hear voices calling from different directions, wounded scattered across the plateau, pinned down by machine gun fire that swept every clear approach. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I can't leave them." The corporal stared at him. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Maybe, but they need help now." He helped rig the private into a makeshift harness using canvas straps and rope. Together, they lowered him over the cliff edge, hand over hand, until stretcher-bearers below could catch him. When Doss turned back toward the plateau, the corporal grabbed his shoulder. "Doss, orders just came through. We're pulling back. Regroup and try again tomorrow with armor support." "What about the wounded?" "They said to get who we can and fall back." Doss looked across the plateau. The machine guns had paused, but he could still hear voices, men calling from the smoke. Men nobody was going to retrieve if the platoon withdrew now. He adjusted his aid bag. "I'm going back. That's suicide. It's my duty." He crawled back into the smoke before the corporal could argue. The second wounded man was trapped beneath a collapsed bunker, a sergeant with a sucking chest wound. Doss applied an occlusive dressing with trembling fingers, whispered another prayer, and dragged him toward the cliff. The machine gun opened up halfway across. Bullets chewed the ground 3 feet to his left. He threw himself into a shell hole, gasping, waiting for the burst to pass. "Lord, help me! Just one more, one more!" When he finally delivered the sergeant to the rope, the corporal was gone. The ridge was emptying. Doss was alone at the top of Hacksaw Ridge, with the wounded, the machine guns, and the fraying rope that was the only way down. He rested against the tree stump, chest heaving, and looked back across the plateau. Somewhere in the smoke, another voice called for a medic. Night was falling over Okinawa, and the machine guns on Hacksaw Ridge had shifted their rhythm. They fired in short, disciplined bursts now, conserving ammunition, waiting. The rain had stopped, but the ground remained slick with mud and blood. Doss moved through the darkness like a ghost, guided only by the voices of wounded men and the faint glow of distant flares. He'd lost count of how many trips he'd made. 11? 15? His shoulders screamed with every pull on the rope. His hands were raw, rope fibers embedded in his palms. But every time he thought about stopping, he heard another voice calling from the plateau. "Medic! Please, somebody help me." Below the cliff, at the staging area, Lieutenant Gorman stood with the battalion surgeon, watching the rope move in the darkness. Every few minutes another wounded soldier appeared at the cliff edge, rigged into the makeshift harness. Every time, stretcher-bearers rushed forward to catch him and carry him to the aid station. "How is he doing this?" Gorman asked. The surgeon shook his head. "I have no idea. We've received 23 casualties from the top in the past 4 hours. All brought to the rope by one man. He's going to collapse. Probably, but he's not stopping." At the aid station, a tent strung between 2 shattered trees, medics worked under dim lanterns. Wounded lay on stretchers in rows, some quiet, some crying out. A doctor moved between them, triaging, giving orders in a tired voice. Every man brought down from the ridge had the same story. The medic found me. The unarmed medic crawled through machine gun fire to get me. A rifleman, Private Chen from 3rd Platoon, sat on a crate with his arm in a sling, watching the cliff. He'd mocked Doss during training. called him a coward for refusing to carry a weapon. Now he couldn't take his eyes off the rope swaying in the darkness above. "He's still up there," Chen said to nobody in particular. "That crazy bastard is still up there." The soldier beside him, a corporal named Williams, nodded slowly. "He's braver than all of us. He doesn't even have a rifle. That's why he's braver." Back on the plateau, Doss knelt beside another wounded man, a young lieutenant from 1st Platoon with shrapnel wounds across his back. The officer was delirious, calling for his mother between prayers. Doss bandaged what he could, gave morphine, and began dragging him toward the cliff. The machine gun opened up again. This time, the burst walked right over their position. Doss pressed his face into the mud, feeling the shockwave of bullets passing overhead. When the firing stopped, he gasped a prayer and kept moving. At the rope, he rigged the lieutenant into the harness with shaking hands. His fingers fumbled the knots. He had to try 3 times before the line held. As he lowered the officer over the edge, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting enemy soldiers. Instead, he found Private Chen, mud-covered and exhausted, carrying a stretcher. "I came back," Chen said. "Couldn't leave you up here alone." Doss stared at him. "You were ordered to pull back. So were you." They looked at each other through the darkness. Then Chen set down the stretcher. "How many more?" Doss looked across the plateau. "I don't know, but I keep hearing voices." They worked together through the night. Doss treating wounds, Chen helping carry men to the rope. The machine guns fired sporadically, searching for movement. Twice they had to freeze in craters while enemy patrols passed nearby. By midnight, Doss's legs were trembling. His vision blurred. He could barely lift his arms, but the voices kept calling and he kept moving toward them. "Lord, help me. Just one more." Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The rope became the only truth that mattered on Hacksaw Ridge that night. Everything else, orders, tactical plans, the broader shape of the Okinawa campaign, faded into abstraction. What remained was simple: wounded men above, safety below, and a single fraying line connecting them. Doss had stopped thinking in words. His mind moved through a fog of exhaustion and prayer, operating on instinct and faith. His body completed tasks automatically. Tie the harness, check the knots, lower the man, whisper a prayer, crawl back into the smoke. The rope fibers bit into his palms with every pull. Blood seeped through his bandages. Around 200 hours, he found the worst case yet. A sergeant trapped in a collapsed cave entrance, both legs crushed beneath fallen timber. The man was conscious but fading, his breathing shallow. "Leave me," the sergeant whispered. "Save yourself." Doss ignored him. He braced his feet against the timber and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, muscles screaming, still nothing. Chen appeared beside him, silent, and together they heaved. The timber shifted, they pulled again. It rolled free. The sergeant's legs were mangled. Doss splinted them with broken rifle stocks and canvas strips, working by feel in the darkness. He gave the last morphine syringe. Then he and Chen rigged a stretcher from poncho halves and bamboo poles. Getting the sergeant to the rope took 40 minutes. They moved 5 yards, rested, moved again. Machine gun fire chased them across the plateau. Mortars landed somewhere to the north, shaking the ground. When they finally reached the cliff edge, Doss found the rope was nearly worn through where it scraped against the coral rock. Individual fibers had snapped, creating a weak section that bulged under tension. Chen saw it too. "It won't hold much longer." Doss examined the damage. The sergeant weighed maybe 180. The rope might support him, or it might snap halfway down, sending him tumbling onto the rocks below. "We have to try," Doss said. They rigged the sergeant carefully, distributing weight across multiple loops. Doss whispered a prayer as they began lowering him. The rope creaked. The weak section stretched. Below, in the staging area, Lieutenant Gorman watched the rope sag and tremble. He could hear it groaning, see individual strands popping. "It's going to break," someone said. The surgeon stepped forward. "Everyone ready? If it snaps, we catch him." The rope held, barely. When the sergeant reached the bottom, stretcher bearers rushed forward. The rope swung free, lighter now, and Doss stared at the frayed section with something close to despair. How many more could it take? Chen touched his shoulder. "There's still men up here. I heard someone calling from near the bunker line." Doss looked at the rope, looked at Chen, looked across the plateau where dawn was beginning to touch the smoke with grey light. "One more trip," he said. "Then we get fresh rope." They found him in a crater near the northern edge, a rifleman with a gut wound, semi-conscious, whispering his wife's name. Doss bandaged what he could, knowing it wasn't enough. This man needed surgery. Needed it hours ago. They carried him to the rope as the sky lightened. The machine guns woke with the dawn, chattering across the ridge. Bullets snapped past. Doss and Chen dropped into cover, the wounded rifleman between them. "We're not going to make it," Chen gasped. Doss looked at the fraying rope, at the rifleman dying in the mud, at the grey sky promising another day of killing. He thought about the machine guns, about the officers who'd said the battlefield belonged to whoever had the most firepower, about the doctrine that taught survival through superior violence. Then he looked at his empty hands. No weapon, no grenades, nothing but bandages and faith. "We're going to make it," he said quietly. "We have to." They crawled the last 30 yards under continuous fire, dragging the rifleman between them. When they reached the rope, Doss's hands were shaking so badly he could barely tie the knots. As they lowered the wounded man, the rope groaned. Fibers popped. The weak section stretched to breaking, but it held. And one more man came off Hacksaw Ridge alive. They sent a runner up the cliff at dawn with fresh rope and orders for Doss to come down. The battalion commander wanted him evacuated. Exhaustion, exposure, borderline collapse. But when the runner reached the top of Hacksaw Ridge, he found Doss and Chen still moving across the plateau, still searching. "Sir," the runner said, breathless, "you're ordered to withdraw. Fresh platoons are coming up to relieve." "Did they bring medical supplies?" Doss interrupted. Yes, sir. Some. Then leave them here and go." The runner stared at him. Doss's uniform was caked with mud and dried blood. His hands were wrapped in torn bandages. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollow. "Sir, you need rest," the battalion surgeon said. "There's still men up here." The runner looked across the plateau. Smoke drifted through the ruins. Somewhere in the distance, a machine gun fired a short burst. "How many?" Doss shook his head. "I don't know, but I keep hearing voices." What the citation would later say, Private First Class Desmond Doss repeatedly risked his life to rescue wounded soldiers under intense enemy fire, lowering approximately 75 men to safety using a rope rigged over Hacksaw Ridge. What the citation would never say, that by dawn on the second day, Desmond Doss couldn't remember his own name, that he crawled to wounded men on instinct, treating injuries while sobbing with exhaustion, that twice he collapsed beside bodies, only to wake minutes later and keep moving, that Private Chen had to physically restrain him when he tried to crawl toward enemy positions, convinced he heard American voices calling from beyond the Japanese lines. What the citation would never say, that at some point during the night, Doss had stopped being a medic performing rescues and become something else, a man caught in a loop of trauma and duty, unable to stop even when his body gave out. Driven by a faith that had calcified into compulsion, Chen saw it happen. Around 600 hours after they'd delivered another wounded man to the new rope, Doss turned back toward the plateau and Chen grabbed his arm. "Doss, stop, please." Doss pulled away, eyes unfocused. "They're calling. Can't you hear them? There's nobody left up there. We've been over the whole plateau twice." "No. Listen. They're calling for a medic." Chen listened. All he heard was wind and distant gunfire. But Doss was already walking back toward the ruins, swaying on his feet. Chen followed him to a crater near the cliff's western edge. Doss dropped into it and began searching frantically, moving debris, calling out. There was no one there. No body. No blood, just mud and shattered bamboo. Medic, Doss whispered, as if answering a call only he could hear. I'm coming. Hold on. Chen knelt beside him. Doss, brother, you saved them. You saved all of them. But you gotta come down now. You gotta rest. Doss looked at him. For a moment, recognition flickered. How many did we get? I don't know. Dozens, maybe more. But you're done. You did enough. Doss's face crumpled. He covered his eyes with his ruined hands and wept, great shaking sobs that seemed to pull something fundamental out of his chest. Chen held him, there in the mud, while machine guns chattered in the distance and the sun rose over Okinawa. When Doss finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I thought if I could just get one more, it would be enough. Just one more. But it never stops. The voices never stop. Chen helped him to his feet. Then let's get you down. Let someone else carry it for a while. They walked to the rope together. Chen rigged Doss into the harness and began lowering him, hand over hand, down the cliff face. Halfway down, Doss looked up at the plateau one last time. He could still hear them calling. He would hear them calling for the rest of his life. The battalion surgeon met Desmond Doss at the bottom of the cliff and immediately ordered him evacuated to the field hospital. Dehydration, exhaustion, rope burns requiring stitches, possible stress fracture in both shoulders. Doss tried to protest, but his legs gave out. They carried him to an ambulance on a stretcher, the same kind of stretcher he'd used to save men on the ridge. At the field hospital, while doctors cleaned his wounds, a colonel from division headquarters appeared with a notebook and questions. How many men had he brought down? What route had he used? Had he encountered enemy patrols? Doss couldn't answer most of it. The memories ran together, mud and rope and praying and hands slipping on wet canvas. He remembered faces but not names, remembered wounds but not how many. The colonel wrote everything down anyway, shaping chaos into an after-action report. The preliminary count is 75, the colonel said. 75 wounded soldiers evacuated from the top of Hacksaw Ridge under continuous enemy fire in approximately 18 hours by one unarmed medic. Doss stared at him. That can't be right. Multiple witnesses confirm it. You made somewhere between 60 and 80 trips, possibly more. The number felt meaningless, too big to connect to the small, desperate moments of crawling through smoke and whispering prayers. Too clean to contain the smell of blood and cordite, the sound of men screaming, the texture of rope burning through his palms. I just tried to help, Doss said quietly. I just kept hearing them call. The colonel closed his notebook. You'll be recommended for the Medal of Honor. Doss closed his eyes. He didn't want a medal. He wanted sleep. He wanted the voices to stop. What nobody wrote in the report, that Private Chen had to be sedated after coming down from the ridge, screaming about voices in the smoke. That Lieutenant Gorman resigned his commission 6 months later, unable to reconcile his orders to withdraw with what Doss had done by staying. That the battalion surgeon kept a list of the 75 men in his desk drawer and would pull it out on quiet nights, reading names like a prayer. What nobody wrote, that the rope stayed rigged at the top of Hacksaw Ridge for 3 more days, used by other medics and stretcher-bearers, until it finally snapped under the weight of a wounded sergeant. That when it broke, soldiers below heard the fibers pop like gunfire and thought the Japanese were attacking. That they gathered the pieces afterward and someone kept them, though no one was sure why. 50 years later, an elderly man stood in a church basement in Alabama, speaking to a room full of veterans and their families. His hands trembled. They'd never stopped trembling since Okinawa. His voice was soft. People ask me how I did it, Desmond Doss said. They want to know how I saved all those men, and I tell them I didn't save anyone. The Lord did. I just kept asking him for one more. Just one more. In the back row, an old man with a cane stood up. His voice cracked. You saved me. April 30th, 1945. I was bleeding out in a crater near the bunker line. You crawled to me under machine gun fire. You told me I was going to make it. You tied a tourniquet and dragged me to the cliff. I've got 3 kids and 7 grandchildren because of what you did. So with respect, sir, you saved me." Doss looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, eyes wet. "I'm glad you made it home." Others stood then, one by one. Men in their 70s now, faces lined with age, but they remembered. They remembered the unarmed medic who refused to leave them, who came back again and again, who proved that mercy could accomplish what violence couldn't. After the gathering ended, Doss sat alone in the empty church basement. Someone had left him a cup of coffee. He wrapped his trembling hands around it and stared at nothing. He could still feel the rope, still smell the smoke, still hear the voices calling from the plateau. They never stopped. 50 years, and they never stopped. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he could also hear something else, the sound of men breathing, living, grateful, home. And in those moments, the weight felt just a little lighter. Not gone, never gone, but bearable. The machine guns had owned that ridge. Everyone said so. Firepower determined victory. That was doctrine, that was truth. Until one unarmed medic climbed a cliff with nothing but bandages and faith and proved that mercy, wielded with impossible courage, could win battles that violence alone never could. The legend said he saved 75 men. The memory said he saved one man 75 times, whispering the same prayer every time, "Lord, help me get just one more." And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.